Welcome to Northlandia, a place to bring you curiosity because here you'll find curiosities. I'm Wyatt Buckner of the Duluth News Tribune, and I will be your guide as we discover the unique and fascinating stories here in the Northland. Here we celebrate the region's distinctive people, places, and history. In this episode, we look back at the small zoo that once stood in a Virginia city park. Let's venture forth into Northlandia. To take us through the history of this former Iron Range Zoo is reporter Teri Cadeau. Teri, welcome back.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be back.
All right, so Teri, what is this supposed zoo, former zoo in this Virginia city park, and what prompted you to look into this?
Well, it's not supposed. It did exist. You've seen the remains.
Yep, I have. It was supposed to me. For outsiders, like, what is this place? This couldn't possibly be real.
Basically, for the first 50 years that Olcott Park in Virginia was a park, it had a small zoo in it. It had like different kind of animals, things like bears and wolves and peafowl. I'm not exactly sure what peafowl, but there's also peacocks, and different animals and wild game, and especially noted were the monkeys. And so from 1910, when the park first opened, all the way through 1964, so the first 54 years, the park had a small collection of animals that it kept as part of being a park.
Mm-hmm. And we've established in this podcast before, you grew up in the Iron Range, so were you aware, did you know much about this former zoo, leading up, prior to, actually looking into it?
So I knew a little bit. I spent a lot of time in that park growing up. That's like that was the cool park to go to. Like, oh yeah, you know what I mean? There's the parks in your town, but then it's like, oh, we're in Virginia. Why don't we go to Olcott Park? Mm-hmm. That was the fun park. That was when you're visiting grandma and you have time to spare, so you go to Olcott Park. But I'd heard about this small building in the park having monkeys once upon a time, but I didn't really. I heard that, my parents told me that, but I didn't really process it at the time. I was like, oh, okay. And I assumed that they meant before they were born, like they way back in the day, or they had them once, or it was like a one-time thing. And then I started thinking about it as a possible Northlandia. I was like, so when was this? When did this happen? And I started looking into it, and I realized that the last time that they had monkeys there was in 1964. And that's when both of my parents were alive, so I was like, okay. So I called them up and I was like, hey, did you ever go see the monkeys at Olcott Park? And my dad, he grew up on North Side, Virginia, which is the side of town that Olcott is on. So he's like, yeah, all the time, literally all of the time. Even my mom, when they lived in Gilbert, they would drive into town and go hang out in the park and see the monkeys and the different animals. So yeah, they both had very, very clear memories. So I'm like, okay, there's people I can talk to about this. There's people who remember this. This is something that's interesting, and things people my age don't know about it because we weren't around yet. Mm-hmm. So it's definitely something kind of interesting to look into. And there's still a landmark there that denotes that time, that marks it. Mm-hmm. So, yeah. I
mean, I know you definitely got good reaction / encouragement to pursue the story when it was brought up in the Northlandia group meeting. Everyone's like, Monkey Island? What?
Yeah.
That's how it was first brought up, was specifically the Monkey Island aspect of it, because that does...
Well, that's because I didn't realize there were so many other animals there, because I knew that there were monkeys on this one structure that was there. I'd seen, I think, pictures at the Virginia Area Historical Society has pictures of monkeys on Monkey Island. There's some included in the story. They were kind enough to share them with us. And I remember having seen them or seen illustrations of them or different things when I visited the Historical Society as a child, because my aunt, Betty Pond, formerly Betty Bernstall, was the curator of that museum for several years. And so she kind of ran it, and we would go visit her a lot. So I would spend a lot of time looking at stuff at that museum. But again, it didn't totally sink in until years later, being like, oh, this was a thing that happened, and this is a bigger deal than I thought it was. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So how did this even come about in the first place, and why?
So the park first opened in 1910, 1911, and it was just kind of common practice back then to have a couple of animals, maybe pets that were surrendered, or there's a very thorough document about how Olcott Park came to be on the City of Virginia's website, with a lot of nice cited sources and details and information. And they talk a lot about how it was just kind of common practice for parks back then to do this. This was a lot of parks just, took abandoned circus animals or pets that people didn't want anymore. Maybe they got them and they thought they could handle them and they couldn't. And so that was just kind of a place where all these different animals would go. And then they decided to bring in other ones from different places, or they did trades. Or in the case of the monkeys, I heard that apparently they would rent the monkeys for the summer. Like they would like pay somebody, they'd have the monkeys for like 5 months of the year, and then the monkeys during the winter would go back to wherever they had come from. Like that, they had rent-a-monkeys. So that was where it kind of came from. The park itself is named after a mining, I believe, the head of the Oliver Mining Company, whose last name was Olcott at the time.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yep.
That tracks.
Yeah, and so then they decided to, because the monkeys were kind of a main attraction, like they were the ones that people kind of flocked to see, they decided to build them a more permanent enclosure. And so this is during the kind of New Deal era. So there were a lot of like works that were being done, public works administration. We're doing different buildings and whatnot. A lot of the kind of historic looking stone buildings that you see around the range, or big like kind of the fences around like cemeteries or whatever, they're made out of stone. A lot of those were built during like the New Deal era because that was putting people back to work. And so that's when they built Monkey Island, the nice little stone circular structure that has a huge like moat around it and everything. You kind of saw what it looks like. And that was to become the permanent home of the monkeys.
Yeah. So before we get more into Monkey Island, let's talk about, you said you talked to some people who shared memories about visiting the zoo. Obviously you talked to your parents, but beyond your parental figures, what did the other people you talked to have to say? Yeah.
So I ended up calling my aunt to get reach out and be like, hey, do you know anyone else who I could talk to about this, who would be willing to talk to me about Monkey Island? Because I know you remember it. I know my parents remember it, but is there anyone else who you can think of? And she gave me a couple of names of people who had definite memories and some stories. And they were people who, two of them worked a lot on the fountain restoration project that, I don't know if that people are aware of, but there's a really well-known electric fountain in Olcott Park that changes colors and is very beautiful. And they did a huge restoration project for that area of the park a couple of years ago. And so they were very involved in that. So yeah, they have obviously had like treasured memories of Olcott Park. So they talked to me a lot about going to see the monkeys and the different animals, going there to visit the greenhouse and see the different things that were there. And they had a lot of memories of like going to see the monkeys and just enjoying them. And then all of them unfortunately remembered the very tragic part where they had to stop having the monkeys after the 1960s because there was some vandalism and monkeys got injured, if not killed. So,
jeez. So, what happened there? Is there much that's known about that situation?
Basically, vandals broke in. We don't know how many. We don't know the details because there weren't exactly security cameras in the 19th. I mean, not at a park back in the day. But they broke in and monkeys ended up dead. So they decided this is no longer manageable. This is not going to happen. So after that time, they stopped getting monkeys in, and they just kind of let the animals, as they passed on or whatever, they didn't replace them. They just said, okay, we're going to be done having a zoo portion of the park. There's also when we're getting more zoological standards in and like how to care for creatures and how to, and so that kind of became, they were like, well, this isn't our focus. This isn't what we wanted. We're a park.
A free park. Not exactly a business or a nonprofit per se, just a free, accessible place for people to come see some animals. Yeah, which is something that they talked a lot about, how the importance of parks and having a free park and having this place where it's free to go to. You can go and do picnics. You can go and do whatever you want to do. They have band concerts there all through the summer, apparently, which is pretty fun. And so that's what happened there. Although that was the end of after that incident happened, they were done with the monkeys. But that wasn't the end of Monkey Island. That space, as I'm reading your article, got a new resident staying there afterwards. Tell me what happened there. So after that, they had a bear stay in the Monkey Island enclosure. It was known as Fuzzy the Bear. According to Mike Schoolis, he talked a lot about how he would watch his dad, Joe, go and visit Fuzzy the Bear, because Joe worked for the greenhouse mostly, but he also kind of helped care for whatever needed
to be done at the time. There was a limited number of park workers, and he would do whatever needed to be done. And so he would go and he would feed Fuzzy the bear, and he would approach the enclosure and kind of talk to him and like make, be friendly to him. And it seemed like the bear was listening to him. So he kind of like, okay, they had a as much rapport as like a human and a bear can have when you also stay far away from the bear, because you don't want to be, it's still a black bear. And so they had a good relationship, which would have come in hand. Okay, basically, here's the story. It's a case of mistaken bear identity. One time, Mike remembers his father, Joe, being woken up in the middle of the night because they heard the police were calling them to say, hey, your bear is down by the lake. And he's like, well, what am I supposed to do about that? Like, it's a bear. I still can't, it's still a bear, And so they decided, okay, well, we're going to go. So he went with his father down to the lake. It was a few blocks away. I don't know if you kind of saw that there's a ball field and whatever, a few blocks away from the park. And he went there and he started approaching the bear and he goes, yeah, that's not Fuzzy the bear. That's a regular bear. I don't know what you want me to do about this. I can't really do anything. This is legitimately a wild bear. I'm not going near it. And so then the police were like, oh, okay. And they tranquilized it and brought it out to like the middle of nowhere to leave it and let it live its bear life, not in the middle of town.
It's like we talked about before the podcast a little bit too, is like my initial reaction, well, didn't they go check to make sure that their bear was missing first before?
Yeah. And so apparently they did check, but not as thoroughly as they maybe could have or should have, because maybe they had the conception in their mind of like, oh, the bear is missing, and they didn't. It's a black bear. I don't know. My parents have a dog. It's a black dog. When it is in its little like kennel area that it likes to go and hide in, you can't always see that it's in there. So I can't totally fault them for not being able to see, but at the same time too, like, it is a bear.
Yeah. I'm sure, again, it's one of those things where, like, you go into it, like, looking to see, confirm that he's not there. And if you don't see him right away, it's, okay, he's obviously not there. And then you can go situation. But
I can't tell you how many times we've grown up, we get calls, your dog is by my house. And we look and the dog is right there by your foot. And you're like, I don't know what dog you're talking about, but it's not this one. So it's kind of a common feeling. But also, again, this is a bear.
Mm-hmm. And was the ultimate fate of Fuzzy kind of like the other animals, where it's like they're, after the time comes, is kind of don't replace them, and then
Yep.
So then, what became of Monkey Island in terms of, because it's definitely there's still remnants there. Obviously, there's the tower kind of like structure there.
Yeah.
But there's no moat there. It's a much smaller.
They have the kind of cement
now.
area. You can see where the moat used to be, but basically they turned it into a giant flower planter. And so they do a big display of flowers in it every year, usually before the Land of the Loon festival that's held in that park. And so they make sure it looks really nice and well planted, and different organizations get together and do it. They filled in the moat area, so it's not like a huge blocking point, but yeah, basically that's what they decided to do to it. And they do also have in that park, I didn't send you guys to see it because I didn't know exactly where it was, so I didn't want to try and instruct you.
I think I know where it is now, not after I read the article after the fact. I think you're talking about.
You don't know what I'm talking about yet.
Oh, maybe I don't. Never mind.
I don't think. Do you know about the memorial?
Is it the little statue
Yeah.
thing? Yeah. After I read your article, after the fact, I was like, oh, wait, because we thought maybe for a moment that was like relevant to it. Because Jay and I went up there.
Because it wasn't right next to it, was it?
No, it was not right next to it.
Yeah, exactly.
So context, Jay and I went up there because we were gathering another Northlandia story, as well as we were gathering a few stories up there.
Yeah.
And so while we were up there.
Basically, I looked and saw you guys were going to be up there, and I'm like, hey, while you're there.
Yeah, exactly. And so that was our last stop of the day. We drive in there, and we have such a hard time finding this thing. We
tried so hard.
I know, we drove in the correct entrance, but it's like if you drive through from 9th Avenue, I think, by the school there, it would have been on the left, and we went right, because that's the way the traffic flowed, and we just didn't look that direction. And as you're driving by, you go past that initial building or whatever, it's like over in the empty field, there's like a single small statue-looking thing there. It's by itself.
Yep. It's got carved monkeys. Yeah.
And so I thought for a moment, was that maybe it? But then Jay was like looking up photos of like what was a Monkey Island, and then we eventually found the actual tower structure. I'm like, okay, that must be a separate thing. And then checked your article later that mentioned like, oh, that was that's what that was.
Yeah,
so I
I didn't know exactly where in the park where it was, so I was like, well, I don't want to send you on a wild goose chase wild monkey chase.
There's our point of the week.
Kind of. I didn't want to send you and be like, hey, try and find this thing, especially because I also didn't know necessarily how much snow they got up there and if it's easy to get to or not, you know. Yeah. All these kind of things. But
we appreciate those considerations.
Yeah. Well, I didn't know how much time we had, so I really wanted Monkey Island. I wanted to see what it looked like, you know, today. I see it. I've been there for Land of Loon and other things in the past, but yeah.
So what's this memorial statue for those who hadn't seen it?
For the monkeys that were killed by vandals.
Man.
Yeah. I know. I'm sorry. The bad news is whenever you're talking about a zoo that used to exist but doesn't anymore, I don't want to say it, but there's usually a reason that it doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah, you're not wrong. Yeah, there's a reason why there was a long pause after that.
I mean, it's kind of it's not the exact same story, but we talked about not too long the Buffalo House and the buffalo, and it doesn't exist anymore because they kept getting out and being, you know, and one of them got killed when it got out. So I mean, it's what happens.
At least that one was, at least as far as we know, accidental versus, you know, deliberate vandalism.
Yeah, vandals. Yeah, that's terrible.
Yeah. But the Monkey Island, trying to bring it back to positivity, the cheery Northlandia. Is there much there at the park? Because one thing that Jay and I were struggling to find, is there anything really like showing besides maybe that memorial statue that what this stone structure is, that this was in fact Monkey Island? Because I
don't think there's like an explainer or anything.
Yeah.
But you definitely, if you go, like I said, if you go to that, I don't know if you saw, there's a building next to the park, right next to it. That actually used to be the park superintendent house, and they turned it into the Virginia Area Historical Society, as well as there's the greenhouse right next. But if you go in there, definitely they have photos and they have information about Monkey Island. So you can definitely easily learn about it. It's just not right next to it, I don't think.
Right. But if you were just like, you know, not familiar with the area's history and you were just happened to be driving through the park, visiting Virginia for whatever reason, you'd have no idea what that is.
You just think it's a nice fancy planter that they made. I don't know.
I think you probably think, oh, that must have been something at some point. It doesn't look new. It definitely looks like, you know.
WPA era building. Yeah, for sure. But and that's kind of why I thought it was time to dig into it a little bit.
So Teri, last question I always ask on the podcast: why do you think that this fits so well in Northlandia? Obviously, it's weird, but beyond that, especially someone who's from the area, you know, you've kind of heard little glimpses here and there, but actually now dive more into the history of this place that apparently your family has like known memories of. And
I think it's fits into Northlandia mostly because it's an interesting bit of history that a lot of people don't know about. It's something that is unique to Virginia. I mean, I haven't heard about this. I know this happened in other towns and other communities, and maybe they had small groups of animals or whatever. But the story of the park, the story of how it came to be, how the monkeys came to be, you know, and the different animals and everything, and people's memories of it is very, very much unique to that place in that period of time. After 1964, people don't have those memories. Like it's not a thing that existed anymore. And so that's something that also will be, I don't want to say lost to time, but I mean like the collective memory of it would be lost if we didn't take a moment to talk about it, look at it, and know and understand how it came to be and how it came to not exist anymore today. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
Cool.
And I think that's a good place to wrap it up. Thank you so much for bringing this to us, Teri.
Thanks for having me.
And thank you for joining us on this venture into Northlandia. To read the article for this week's column and see photos, visit duluthnewstribune.com/topics/Northlandia. If you enjoy this podcast and would like to support us, consider becoming a subscriber of the Duluth News Tribune at duluthnewstribune.com/subscribe. If you or someone you know has a unique story that you believe could have a place here in Northlandia, let us know by emailing northlandia@duluthnews.com. Join us again next week and discover the extraordinary stories that you just might miss if you're not in the right place at the right time, ready to step off the beaten path with no rush to return, here in Northlandia.